Elton John finds his first girlfriend living on the street. What he does next is chilling. The rain fell in sheets over London, pooling in the gutters of Piccadilly Circus as neon lights flickered weakly against the grey dusk. Elton John, then known simply as Reginald Dwight, pulled his coat tighter around himself, the chill seeping through layers of wool. It was 1965, and he had just finished another lackluster gig at a small pub where no one seemed to care about his piano playing or his dreams of stardom. But tonight, something caught his eye. A figure huddled beneath an awning, shivering violently but defiantly staring back at him when their eyes met. She couldn't have been more than 18, her face pale and hollowed, her clothes tattered like they'd seen too many winters. Yet there was something arresting about her. Perhaps it was the way she held herself, despite her circumstances. Or maybe it was the faint glimmer of recognition that passed between them. He hesitated for only a moment before crossing the street, his boots splashing through puddles. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice tinged with genuine concern. Her name was Lila, she told him after some coaxing, though she didn't offer much else beyond that. She wouldn't say how long she'd been living on the streets or why she ended up there, but Elton felt drawn to her all the same. There was a rawness to her presence that reminded him of himself, an outsider trying desperately to find a place in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. Over cups of tea at a nearby cafe, he learned fragments of her story. She loved music, hated crowds, and dreamed of escaping the city someday. In return, he shared his own struggles, the endless auditions, the rejection letters, the nagging fear that he'd never amount to anything. What neither of them realized was that this chance encounter would set off a chain of events neither could have anticipated. As days turned into weeks, Elton found himself visiting Lila regularly, bringing her food, blankets, even sheet music from his gigs. She became his muse, inspiring melodies that flowed effortlessly from his fingertips. For the first time, his songs carried weight, emotion, a sense of urgency. People began to notice. His manager called it a breakthrough. But Elton knew better. It wasn't ambition driving him. It was Lila. But then came the night everything changed. After a particularly grueling performance, Elton returned to the spot where he'd first met Lila, only to find it empty, no sign of her anywhere. Panic clawed at his chest as he searched every alley, every shadowy corner, calling out her name until his voice grew hoarse. Finally, he stumbled upon a crumpled note tucked under a loose brick near the cafe where they used to sit. The handwriting was shaky, almost frantic. "Reggie, I'm sorry. You deserve better than someone like me. Don't look for me." Elton stared at the words, his mind racing. What did she mean? Where could she possibly go? And most importantly, why? Just as Elton resolves to track her down, he receives a mysterious phone call late one evening. A distorted voice on the other end whispers, "If you're looking for Lila, stop. She's safer without you." If you love stories about unexpected connections and the power of human resilience, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more gripping narratives. Share your thoughts below. What do you think happened to Lila? Elton sat frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear long after the line went dead. The voice had been unrecognizable, mechanical, almost robotic, but its message was chillingly clear. Someone knew about Lila. Someone didn't want him interfering. His mind raced with possibilities. Was she in trouble? Had she gotten mixed up with dangerous people, or worse, had he somehow put her in harm's way by involving himself in her life? He couldn't shake the guilt that gnawed at him. For weeks, he'd convinced himself he was helping her, pulling her out of the shadows and into his world of music and dreams. But now, doubts crept in. What if she hadn't wanted saving? What if she'd seen him not as a savior, but as another burden weighing her down? These questions haunted him, twisting like knots in his stomach every time he sat down at the piano. The melodies that once flowed so freely now felt hollow, incomplete, without her presence to inspire them. Determined to uncover the truth, Elton began retracing Lila's steps, piecing together fragments of her life from scraps of information she'd let slip during their conversations. She'd mentioned a brother who lived in Manchester, a musician like her, but never gave his name. She spoke fondly of a park near King's Cross where she used to play as a child. And then there was the scar on her wrist, which she always kept hidden beneath layers of fabric. Each clue led him deeper into a labyrinth of secrets, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about the girl he thought he knew. One evening, while rifling through old newspapers at the local library, Elton stumbled upon an article that stopped him cold. It was dated 3 years prior and bore the headline, "Teenager Missing After Fire Destroys Family Home." Beneath it was a grainy photograph of a young girl with wide, frightened eyes, the same girl he'd met under the awning. According to the article, Lila Harper, her last name confirmed what he'd suspected, had disappeared shortly after a fire claimed her family home, leaving behind only her older brother, Daniel. No bodies were found, and the case was eventually closed due to lack of evidence. A chill ran down Elton's spine as he read the details. The fire wasn't accidental, it had been deliberately set, though investigators never determined who was responsible. Could this be why Lila vanished? Had she been running from whoever started the fire? The implications were staggering, and yet they made a grim kind of sense. Her evasiveness, her refusal to talk about her past, it all pointed to someone trying desperately to stay hidden. Armed with this new information, Elton decided to visit Manchester. If anyone knew where Lila might be, it would be her brother. But tracking down Daniel proved harder than expected. After hours of searching, he finally located a dilapidated apartment building on the outskirts of the city. Inside, the air smelled of dampness and neglect, and the walls were paper-thin, allowing snippets of muffled arguments and crying babies to seep through. When Elton knocked on the door marked Harper, it opened just wide enough for a pair of wary eyes to peer out. "Who are you?" the man asked, his voice rough and suspicious. He looked nothing like the carefree musician Lila had described. His face was gaunt, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the edge of the door. "I'm a friend of Lila's," Elton replied, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm looking for her." The mention of her name seemed to strike a nerve. Daniel hesitated, then stepped aside to let Elton in. The apartment was sparse, furnished with little more than a mattress on the floor and a small table cluttered with empty bottles. As Elton explained how he'd met Lila and what had transpired since, Daniel listened silently, his expression unreadable. When Elton finished, Daniel sighed heavily, rubbing his temples as though trying to ward off a headache. "You don't understand," he said finally. "She's not safe. None of us are." "What do you mean?" Elton pressed, leaning forward. Daniel hesitated again before reaching into a drawer and pulling out a folded piece of paper. Unfolding it, he revealed a crude sketch of a symbol, a circle with jagged lines radiating outward, resembling a sunburst. "This is why she left," he said, tapping the drawing. "It's a mark used by a gang operating in London. They're dangerous, Reggie. If they think you're looking for her..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication hung heavy in the air. Just as Elton prepares to leave, Daniel slips him a second note containing an address. "If you really want to help her," Daniel says cryptically, "start here." The address leads to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of London, rumored to be a hideout for the very gang Daniel warned him about. What would you do next if you were in Elton's shoes? Would you risk everything to find Lila, or walk away before it's too late? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter of this gripping story. The warehouse loomed against the night sky, its skeletal frame silhouetted by the faint glow of distant streetlights. Elton stood at the edge of the property, his breath visible in the cold air, as he clutched the crumpled note Daniel had given him. The address was scrawled hastily, almost carelessly, but there was no mistaking it. This was the place. His heart pounded like a drumbeat in his chest, each thud echoing louder than the last. What if Daniel was wrong? What if this wasn't about Lila at all, but some elaborate trap meant to silence anyone who got too close? But then again, what choice did he have? Walking away felt impossible, not after everything he'd uncovered, not after seeing the fear etched into Daniel's face when he spoke of the gang. If Lila was truly in danger, Elton couldn't live with himself knowing he hadn't tried to save her. Summoning every ounce of courage, he slipped through a gap in the chain-link fence surrounding the property and crept toward the building. The windows were boarded up, and graffiti covered the walls in jagged streaks of red and black. One symbol stood out repeatedly, the same sunburst design Daniel had shown him. It seemed to mock him now, taunting him with its ubiquity. Inside, the air smelled of rust and decay. Moonlight filtered through cracks in the ceiling, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Empty crates and discarded tools littered the space, suggesting recent activity. Elton moved cautiously, his footsteps muffled by layers of dust. He paused when he heard voices, low, urgent murmurs coming from somewhere deeper inside. Peering around a stack of crates, he saw them, 3 figures huddled together, their faces obscured by hoodies pulled low over their foreheads. They weren't just talking, they were arguing. One of them held a piece of paper that looked suspiciously like the article Elton had found about the fire. His stomach churned as realization dawned. These people knew something, and whatever it was, it tied directly back to Lila. Before he could retreat, one of the figures glanced up sharply, spotting him. "Hey!" the man barked, rising to his feet. "Who's there?" Elton froze, his mind racing for an excuse, but none came. Instead, instinct took over, propelling him backward as the group surged forward. Heart hammering, he bolted toward the exit, dodging obstacles and narrowly avoiding capture. Behind him, shouts erupted, followed by the sound of pounding footsteps. He burst out into the open air, lungs burning as he sprinted toward the fence. Just as he reached it, a hand grabbed his jacket, yanking him backward. "Well, well," a voice sneered as rough hands pinned him to the ground. "Looks like we've got ourselves a nosy little rat." Elton struggled, adrenaline coursing through his veins. But it was futile. 2 more figures joined the first, their faces emerging from beneath their hoods. One of them, a wiry man with sharp features and piercing eyes, leaned down, gripping Elton's chin and forcing him to meet his gaze. "You've been asking questions you shouldn't," the man said, his tone icy. "About a girl named Lila Harper." Elton's blood ran cold. How did they know? More importantly, where was she? "She doesn't want to be found," the man continued, releasing his grip and standing upright. "And trust me, mate, neither do we. But since you've gone to all this trouble," he exchanged a glance with the others before pulling out a knife, the blade glinting menacingly in the moonlight. "Maybe we'll send her a message instead." Before the knife can strike, a sudden commotion erupts behind them. A figure emerges from the darkness, Lila herself, wielding a metal pipe with trembling hands. Her once hollow eyes are now filled with fury as she swings the weapon with surprising strength, scattering the attackers. She grabs Elton's arm and pulls him to his feet, dragging him away from the chaos. "Run!" she screams, her voice raw with desperation. And run they do, disappearing into the labyrinthine streets of London as sirens wail in the distance. Wow, things just got intense. Did you see that twist coming? Leave your reactions in the comments below. Was Lila's reappearance what you expected, or were you totally blindsided? Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the explosive finale. Elton's legs burned as he and Lila sprinted through the rain-soaked streets, their footsteps splashing in puddles that reflected the city lights like shattered glass. Every breath felt like fire in his lungs, but fear kept him moving. Fear not just for himself, but for her. She clutched his hand tightly, pulling him forward with a strength he hadn't expected from someone so small. Her presence was electric, alive in a way he'd never seen before, yet tinged with desperation. They finally ducked into an alleyway, pressing themselves against the damp brick wall as the sound of pursuit faded into the distance. For a moment, they simply stood there, panting, trembling, not just from exhaustion, but from everything left unsaid between them. "Why did you come back?" Elton asked, breaking the silence. His voice cracked under the weight of emotion. "You told me to leave you alone." Lila turned to face him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Because I couldn't let them hurt you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I thought staying away would keep you safe, but—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "I didn't realize how far they'd go." Elton stared at her, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The gang wasn't after Lila. They were using her as bait. Her disappearance years ago hadn't been about running from her past. It had been about protecting others, specifically Daniel. He remembered the haunted look in her brother's eyes when he spoke of the fire. It wasn't grief, it was guilt. "You knew about the fire, didn't you?" Elton said softly. That's why you left. Lila nodded, her shoulders sagging under the weight of confession. It wasn't supposed to happen, she admitted, her voice breaking. We were kids, messing around. We didn't mean to burn the house down, but when they didn't make it out, she choked on the words, tears streaming down her face. Daniel blamed himself, and then the gang found out. They've been blackmailing us ever since, threatening to expose what really happened if we didn't cooperate. Elton's heart ached for her, for the burden she'd carried alone all these years. But there was no time for pity. Their pursuers would be back soon, and they needed a plan. We have to end this, he said firmly, gripping her shoulders. Together, using scraps of information Lila provided, they devised a risky gambit: lure the gang to a public location where authorities could intervene without risking innocent lives. It was dangerous, reckless even, but it was their only shot at freedom. With Lila guiding him, Elton used his connections in the music scene to arrange a fake gig at a crowded venue. Word spread quickly among the gang that Elton had something valuable to trade. Evidence implicating them in multiple crimes, including arson and extortion. The night of the performance arrived, tension crackling in the air like static electricity. As Elton took the stage, his fingers hovered nervously over the keys of the piano. Below him, the room buzzed with anticipation, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Hidden among the crowd were members of the gang, watching intently as Elton began to play. But instead of launching into a song, he leaned toward the microphone, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "There are people here tonight who don't belong," he announced, his gaze locking onto the gang members scattered throughout the audience. People who think they can control others through fear and violence. Well, guess what? Your game ends here. Pandemonium erupted as police officers flooded the venue, arresting the gang members one by one. Lila watched from the wings, tears streaming down her face, not of sadness this time, but of relief. For the first time in years, she felt free. In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into a fragile sort of normalcy. Lila moved in with Daniel, determined to rebuild their fractured relationship. Elton poured his emotions into his music, crafting songs that resonated deeply with listeners who had also faced darkness and emerged stronger. One track, inspired by Lila's courage, became a breakout hit, a haunting ballad titled Phoenix Rising. Yet even as fame beckoned, Elton never forgot the girl who changed his life forever. Their paths eventually diverged, but the bond they shared remained etched in his soul, a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected encounters lead to the greatest transformations. What did you think of the ending? Did Elton and Lila get the closure they deserved, or is there more to their story? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling tales like this one.